Okay, guys, this is week 4, and we are talking about a really, really important topic: doubt, deconstruction, deconversion, the whole world, which is different things. And I'm gonna play a bit of a different role, and I'll offer some thoughts here and there. But I want to try to keep the pressure on y'all and really talk about this really important topic. So, Dina Davidson, Dominic Doan, DD, both of y'all.
That's so true.
Yeah. So you've written books about this topic. You have a ministry. Talk about that.
Yeah. A couple of years ago, we started a ministry called Pursuing Faith that was born out of this book, When Faith Fails. And essentially just recognizing a few years ago, like, oh, there are so many people right now who are wrestling with this sense of their faith is falling apart, what's become known as deconstruction now. How do we step into that space? So what it looked like for us before joining the Bayside team a few months ago is we'd fly out to churches or universities and just have conversation about this, and a lot of one-on-one mentorship and discipleship for people who are either going through it personally or family members who are like, help, my 16-year-old's deconstructing. What do I do? How do I love them through this? So
great. Love it. So you're the right man for the job. And then Dina, what's your experience with this?
So I work with the age group that's most likely to deconstruct. And so I pastor a group of students that I'm trying to faithfully help them to walk through these questions so that they don't lose their faith at the end of this process. But, when you head off to college or you just leave your parents' home, questions stir up and you don't know where to go for the answers. And so that's my part in the process is I'm walking alongside a lot of people asking the questions that often lead to a negative process of deconstruction. Although I do think there can be some positive processes of deconstruction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. So let's define some terms here for our audience. What would you say deconstruction is? What would you say deconversion is? So we can use those words rightly.
If you've ever played the game Kerplunk, where you have the plastic tube thingy and these plastic straws, and then you pour marbles on top, and one by one you each take out a plastic straw.
This is a great analogy.
And the marbles kind of move around, right? And then someone pulls out the fateful straw, and then suddenly everything comes crashing down. I think that's kind of what it feels like at a spiritual level. We talked about in the last episode, like, as for me, my feet almost slipped in Psalm 73. So doubt is this sense of spiritual vertigo, where on one part of you is like, I had these faiths or things I thought were true growing up, or I think this is true about God or faith, Bible, Jesus, but something has caused that to be shattered and disrupted in my soul. I think you need to distinguish between faith, doubt, and unbelief. And for years, I used to think that doubt was the opposite of unbelief or of faith, but rather it's unbelief. And in Scripture, unbelief is considered a sin. John 3:16, whoever believes in me will not perish. But doubt's kind of that middle murky space in between that, depending on what we do with it, can actually lead us to unbelief, or it can lead us to a more resilient faith.
That's so good. And I do think that is the thing about questions in general is I think of questions like catalysts. So a catalyst just speeds up the rate of change. And so whatever is inside of you, if you are a young college student and you are sitting in a philosophy of religion class and you encounter a question, that question isn't necessarily going to change anything in you, but it is going to be a catalyst. It's going to speed up a rate of change. And that rate of change, depending on how you handle that question, it can push you further into your faith, or it can push you further away, which is not to say that it's all on you. You have to do this process perfectly, but it is like a cautionary. There's a good way to ask questions and handle doubt.
Yeah.
And then there's a way that can be really unhealthy and really perilous to your faith.
Yeah, I mean, doubt, it comes from this Latin word dubitare, which just means two. So someone who doubts, it's like they're operating two different spheres. Again, think of that analogy of a river, and you have a bank on one side, a bank on the other, doubt's that place in between. So when someone doubts, it just means that they're kind of being torn at some level. Usually it's emotional. Usually it's something they've experienced, a problem of evil, which we talked about, is, I think, the primary cause of it. But it just means you're being torn. And it doesn't mean when someone doubts that they're actually losing their faith necessarily. It just means they're questioning. And Jesus encouraged questions. That's how, I think it was his primary mode, actually, of drawing out truth from within, it's kind of Socratic in a sense,
Yeah.
from within his discipleship core. So many times, who do you say I am? Do you believe this? And these questions force them to be open and honest about what they were thinking. So we should welcome the questions and then have a good theology of doubt. What is it? Where does it come from? And then how do we navigate through it?
So one writer has said, it is time that we declare war against this deconstruction Christian movement. There is nothing Christian about it. It is a false religion.
I don't think
Respond.
Jesus would agree with that necessarily.
He said, close the computer.
Yeah.
Let's just lay
Let's get
into
serious.
it. Come on.
I mean, okay, you mentioned that we should distinguish between healthy and unhealthy deconstruction. I think that's absolutely vital. What that author is probably, or speaker, whoever they are, is referring to is
Protect
probably
the guilty.
Yeah, and kind of a fear base. It comes across very fear based, and like what it immediately does is it ostracizes anyone who legitimately has questions.
Right.
And so they may still be a part of that faith community, but they're suppressing their questions more and more. But doubt's greatest strength is secrecy, and Jesus never encouraged us to suppress our doubts. He wants us to be open. I mean, that's how the Bible is written. Brutal honesty towards it.
Wow, that is so helpful. I feel like I feel like any attempt to crack down on someone who is struggling already in their faith by just being like, believe the truth. Like, that's just not something that we have the capacity to do. If I say to you, don't think of a white elephant, this is a classic example, immediately you think of a white elephant. So if we say to people, don't doubt, what are they going to do? They're going to doubt. Don't deconstruct your faith. Well, okay, what are we hiding? Like, why can't we explore these questions? So I think that we should walk away from unhealthy deconstruction, any attempt to just dismantle the revealed truth of God's word. Like, yeah, we should walk away from an attitude that just says our opinion is equal to that of Scripture. But we should never crack down on questions, because just like you were saying, questions are Jesus's main teaching tool all throughout the New Testament.
Yeah, and Jesus, I mean, in a pure sense of the word, deconstructed in the sense that he was a first century Jew, and scholars, first century Judaism tell us this all the time. And he's deconstructing first century Judaism and saying, hey, your views on monotheism, I'm introducing some new ideas, your ideas of election, your ideas of eschatology, the way that you think Israel functions, the way that all of it is one big, I've arrived to deconstruct, reconfigure the furniture. That's what the parables are doing in the minds of the listeners.
That's right.
They're always, now, we're not Jesus, of course, and he was coming to do a very specific thing in salvation history. So we can't all just go, well, that's, whatever. But there are moments after that. I was reading one writer, and they talked about the fact that, like, what Martin Luther did in the Protestant Reformation could have been seen as deconstruction. He posts his theses up on the wall and says, this version of Catholicism is wrong. Justification by faith, sola scriptura, also. So we can't just blanket go, it's wrong to deconstruct, because as one phrase, goes, reformed and always reforming. Like, there's always challenge of generations that need to go, I need to rediscover the gospel. I need to rediscover the application of the gospel to my 100%. Cultural moment. And if the cultural moment has this list of things, which I'm going to ask about, that have taken us off mission and taken us off, Christocentric faith, we should probably push back a little bit and go, let's be careful. So let's come to the question of what are the reasons, you've alluded a little bit. Let's go through 3, 4, 5 reasons why people deconstruct.
I think it's many of the things we're talking about in the skeptical series. You can read science, and at a surface level, it seems to contradict what you read in the Bible or the Bible itself. Sometimes you come across parts of Scripture that seem weird or offensive or bizarre.
I was reading that story the
wars.
other day where the bears come out and Elijah's like, yo, kill all those little
story.
kids over there.
Yeah,
and the
like,
bear
what on
goes and
earth?
mauls 40 kids, and it's like, all right, that was God's will. What?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The read through the Bible in a year programs, right?
Yes.
Like Genesis, Exodus, it's usually pretty fast moving and it's good. People track with it, and then you hit Leviticus. So I think, the Bible, personal suffering, obviously. We are in a cultural moment, as you said, that it is in certain spheres somewhat trendy to deconstruct, right? So there's that pressure, the cultural pressure.
This article was written in 2024. The number is higher. 420,000 posts on Instagram with the hashtag Deconstruction, and I'm sure there's more than that, but yeah,
420,000.
Hashtag. Yeah.
And that's just Instagram?
Yeah.
Yeah, and TikTok, I think, is far.
Oh,
I mean, there are
imagine
so
it's
many
more, yeah.
videos of people deconstructing their faith.
I think also mentioning that we're in a cultural moment where whatever is trendy is trending and is going to keep on trending, right? Until there's a backlash against it and be like, it's no longer popular, that thing that's trending. So the very fact that a deconstruction movement is visible, very visible on social media, I think what that invites people into is, well, I don't want to be left behind in this. I don't want to believe something that's false or dangerous or, the worst, unloving towards people. So I got to make sure that I'm following along on this journey.
Yeah, I think deconstruction too has built in within it a self-destruct button because you can only deconstruct for so long.
That's right.
And we are witnessing this movement. I mean, in New York Times, they talked about the rise of, quote unquote, the ex-evangelicals about a year ago. Washington Post a few months ago said we're witnessing a secular surge. So we're seeing something happen right now, obviously, but you can only deconstruct for so long. You take out the walls, the roof, rip up the foundation, like pretty soon there's nothing left to stand on. And what we've found in the last few years of working with people who are going through times of deconstruction, there are these movements they go through, but inevitably they may find themselves in a place where existentially, if you would, they're standing in a barren land. They've torn apart the entire building, but then life happens and they're confronted with love or justice or suffering. And they're like, how do I answer these questions? And then you're innocent. Your soul is forced to reconstruct in those moments.
Yeah.
And where does that lead you? And Nietzsche, he said, God created us in his image. We've been returning the favor ever since. Sometimes it leads to that. Like, I'm just going to create a worldview that, I'm going to be myself and you be you kind of philosophy. Other times it's a returning to faith, but a deeper, more robust, resilient faith. And that's the thing about deconstruction. It can actually make you more resilient because it's forcing you to engage with these hard questions.
Absolutely. I remember in college, I hit this moment where I had a choice. I basically encountered some questions that I didn't have answers to. But at that point in my college journey, I had just met too many people that walked away from Jesus because of a question. And I just remember having this crisis moment in my faith. I was walking around the lake at my school and I just said to the God that I wasn't exactly sure was still there, I said, I still believe in you. And if I walk away from you, it's not going to be because of this question. It's going to be because there's not a good answer to this question. So I think if I can give any encouragement to someone who finds themselves facing very real doubts and is on a path of deconstruction, I would just say, please, if at all possible, don't quit in the middle. Don't quit when you've just deconstructed. Keep on the journey until you've answered those really big life questions of meaning, of what is the ultimate solution for evil and suffering, all the things that motivated you to begin this journey. Don't stop when you've abandoned your old answer. Please continue the journey forward until that you have the answer that you really truly in your soul of soul and in your mind believe is a better answer to these questions.
That's great.
That is so key. There's this old poem that says, drink deep or taste not the Peruvian spring. And the idea behind that is if you're going to ask the questions, then go deep. I think the worst thing you can do is read a chapter of the God Delusion and just like, I'm abandoning it all.
Exactly.
There's some very good, robust answers written,
Yeah.
with these very specific questions. So identify the questions. What are they? And then don't settle for the low-hanging fruit. And instead, like Jacob, wrestle with God all night. Wrestle through your doubts. But this is so vital. Don't do it alone, right? I think going through times of doubt and deconstruction more than ever, you need community. And having gone through my own time years ago where I was deconstructing my faith and wrestling with a lot of questions, and as an introvert, there is this very real tendency to, I'm just going to wrestle. I was dealing with questions theologically, philosophically. I didn't even share with my own wife. I'm just deeply wrestling with it. And finally, God just kind of drew me out of that. Like, I need to start being open and honest about these questions. And it was having people in my life around me who were praying for me and walking with me through those times really makes all the difference. Like, you were not meant to go through those times alone. If you're listening to this and you are wrestling with your faith, find a community where you can wrestle with others through it. Because when you're alone, I think that it just compounds the discouragement that you feel.
Where do you find that community, the community that will listen to your questions and not condemn you for them?
Yeah.
Because I do find I talk to a lot of students who are bravely now sharing their questions, but they took a crack at it earlier in their faith journey, and it was not received well. I literally was teaching at the Bible conference, and I answered a question, and then afterwards, the man who asked it came up to me and said, "I'm really grateful you asked that question. When I was in parochial school, a nun literally threw a textbook at my head for asking that question." And I was like, that's okay, that's maybe. So I think there's real people who are not safe to ask your questions to. How do you find the good ones, the safe ones to ask
Well,
those
if your
questions
pastor
to?
says things that that quote you read earlier about we're at war with the questioner, that's probably not a very good, healthy community to be a part of.
Yeah.
When someone doubts, they're given two options, and neither option is good. The first option that culture gives is to idolize doubt, and yay, 420,000 views or likes, a repost, come join us, great, tear it all down, but then that doesn't lead anywhere fulfilling. Right. And the second option is to demonize doubt, and that's what you find with certain legalistic, we're at war with the questioner type of people. But that's not the way of Jesus. Jesus invited his followers on a journey. Come follow me, his first words to his disciples. To follow implies journey. It implies mountains. It implies vistas. It implies valleys. It implies
you can
heartache
read the
and
Gospels
growth. Yeah.
with the filter of doubt on. It would be a fascinating read. Like the gospel writers are basically setting up the 3 years of ministry as a guy who knows what he's doing, and the people closest to him are doubting and not sure about the whole thing.
Yeah.
Right till the end.
Yeah.
Matthew 28.
Yep.
He's ascending into heaven.
Yeah. Yes, right.
And Matthew says, and some still doubted.
Right. They're
It's
watching it happen.
You're watching a guy fly, and you're like, I
And
don't know.
he still sent them out.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
sent out the worshipers and the doubters. I mean, that's the mind-blowing thing to
He
me.
does the 5,000.
Yeah.
They get in the boat, and then Mark says because they didn't understand the lesson of the basket of the fish and the loaves.
Yeah.
It's like it's one big doubt story.
Oh, yeah.
That's
John
so
the
good.
Baptist, who
Yeah, it's like,
baptized
I'm-
Jesus.
I'm waiting for
who
another.
has
Should I
this-
get another guy here? Yeah,
the
he's in prison.
Trinitarian moment of the
Yeah.
Father speaking, the Spirit descending, the Son being baptized. Like
And knowing
most-
in his womb, right?
Yes,
Like he had the knowledge.
He's the guy that did the Harlem Shake in his mother's womb when Jesus walked into the room via Mary. But yeah, you're right.
He
He's
does.
in prison. He's like, I don't even know if you're the Messiah. And then Jesus turned around. I mean, that's about the harshest doubt you could ever have. Talk about, I don't know if Jesus is it. And Jesus then looks at his disciples. He said, there's no one greater than John the Baptist. And it's not because Jesus is like, yay, you're good for doubt. But rather, he understands that John was on this journey, and to doubt it's immensely human. I think so many times we get our theology of doubt from Genesis 3 rather than Genesis 1. Yeah. And what I mean by that is often what you'll hear in certain sectors of Christianity is doubt's always evil because isn't that what Satan used in the garden, Genesis 3?
Right.
And he did. He used doubt in a
Did God
destructive
really
way.
say? Yeah.
But I would actually, and this kind of gets into a little bit of Augustine, I'd push it back to Genesis 1, that doubt is just going to be the natural byproduct of the world that we live in because God created a world with limitations and boundaries and barriers, and he sets the Garden of Eden within boundaries and barriers, and Adam and Eve had boundaries and barriers intellectually, spiritually, in so many different ways. But then he invited them on a journey to learn and to grow, to discover. How do we learn, grow, discover? It's through the process of being shaken sometimes, awake through heartache, through difficulty, through wondering what's on the other side of these boundaries, that our faith begins to grow. So if we get our theology of doubt from Genesis 1, seeing that, this is part of the process of being human, and it's an invitation to discover and to grow, rather than just, it's always evil, it's always wrong. And I think that actually is such a destructive way to put an end to people's growth trajectory. And really, it's a huge turnoff to people who are in the church who are wrestling. That's why I love this series that we're doing, because it throws open the door and says, we want to grow with you. And we also want to present these resources to you historically where Christianity has engaged with these things. And the Bible itself engages with
really
these
good.
things.
Well, and you talked about Nietzsche earlier, and if you go read the very famous passage of the killing of God, it's actually super poetic. And so for those of you who haven't, the madman jumped into their midst and pierced them with his eyes. Whither is God, or where is God? I will tell you, we've killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers. But how did we do this? How could we drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun? Whither is it moving now? Where is it moving now? Where are we moving? Away from all suns? Are we not plunging continually backward, sideways, forward in all directions? Is there still any up or down? Are we not straying as through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? It's like,
It's so good.
dude, this is poetry.
Yeah.
And he's not, the whole declaration of the murder of God or the death of God. It's like, he's the one saying, if we detach ourselves from this sun, S-U-N, we can never go back.
Yep.
There's nothingness. And who gave us this? What authority? It's a wrestling.
Yeah.
And I think, to your point earlier, you eliminate it, and just when you start to go down the road, just know, as you said, actually explore the questions with a sincere heart to explore them. But just know there come a point where there's nothing left to deconstruct.
Yeah.
And that's a lonely space. So you got to approach these questions very sincerely.
Yeah.
I think also with that, kind of the answer to Nietzsche saying, God is dead. And so what do you do with all this fear that he presents in this passage? And he ends up saying, well, actually I'm from the future. This hasn't happened yet. This is yet to be. And so the answer existentially, the existential philosophers, they said, we just need to make this leap to meaning. And there's this sense as you study philosophy within this time that we're embarking on this very brave endeavor. So going back to your image of the river and being pulled between these two banks, I think that is the feeling of deconstruction and doubt. It's a fearful thing. You feel like you are losing touch with something very precious. And there's really two responses. For those that are informed Christians, they understand that there is a brave response, which is to say something that a father in the gospel said, which is, I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief.
Yeah.
That is a very brave declaration. Some part of my soul still finds it in me to wonder at this God, to wonder at this story, and to attach myself to this faith, though I have very many questions. And that is bravery in the informed Christian sense. On the other side, there's existential philosophy that says we make this leap to meaning. First of all, we embrace doubt, and that itself is a stance of bravery, and say we're willing to embark on this journey. And then we result by saying we will be brave and create our own meaning. But I think the story that's less told is that one of informed faith, of saying it's still very possible to not have answers, but to still maintain faith, because faith is this conviction. It's not certainty. It's conviction.
Yeah.
It is belief in something. It is belief in the unknown and the unseen and not having all the answers. So I just want to throw that out there, because if you go on this deconstruction journey, you might be enticed by this one vision of what bravery looks like. Yeah. And bravery is what you want when you're scared. Right. But there's this alternate vision of what a brave, informed Christian looks like, to say, I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief.
Oh my gosh, that's so good. H.G. Wells, he has this short book that you can find online called The Country of the Blind. And it tells a story of this Ecuadorian explorer named Nunez, who tumbles down into this valley and is knocked unconscious, wakes up, and he finds himself just surrounded by beauty and waterfalls and lush plants. And he finds this village there. And when he arrives in the village, everyone in that village is blind. And it turns out for generations they've been that way. Someone had gotten sick years ago, passed it on, and they were not only blind, but they had lost the memory of sight. He comes on the scene and he takes upon himself to describe the beauty of the world that they're in. Hey, you guys are in the most epic place, waterfalls, plants, all of this. It's here. And they said, no, you're the deluded one. And long story short, he falls in love with one of the village elders' daughters, and they're like, the only way we'll let you marry her is if you allow one of our village doctors to gouge out your eyes. And so he had to make this choice. Where do I marry the one I love and stop talking about this world that they say is imaginary? Or do I keep my eyes and ultimate reality I'm in tune with? And there's this tension that he's painting, and I share that because there is space for tension. There is a space, as Christopher Wright put it, to believe in the God you don't understand. I think each one of us should have a bucket in our brain that has a big question mark on it.
What about this? What about that?
I don't get it. Honestly, there are parts of the Bible.
Bear's story.
Yeah,
It just goes in
parts
that
of the
bucket.
Bible.
All those kids.
And I've read the books, and I've seen what different apologists say, but there are parts that I still don't get. I still don't
It's mean
understand.
to be called bald. It's
Yeah.
hey, baldy.
Such a
It's like, come
fascinating
on,
story.
guys.
I clearly deserve capital
to
punishment.
die.
I mean, imagine having
By
your
the
own personal bear
mauling
that
of
you
it.
could just pull out like that.
So,
I'm a prophet.
last point on this. I think one of the more popular versions of deconstruction today is church hurt.
Yeah.
So we've talked about evil and suffering, the Bible, that kind of stuff. We haven't really talked about church hurt. So when you're sitting with someone, and this is the reason, the church hurt me, or I don't know what the versions of it are. Whether it's my favorite pastor online fell.
Yeah.
There's that. But then there's like, no, I was actually part of the church for years and I got hurt by it. What can you give us a couple talking points, both of you, from what that's looked like?
I think first of all, you got to acknowledge the hurt. When you see what Christians have done, different sectors of Christendom throughout history, whatever wars or bloodshed has been fought in the name of religion, like owning that, being honest about that is really key. And then just owning and being honest with where they're at, what they've experienced. And we've all been there. But also, too, like, we follow Jesus, and Jesus is in this process of transforming us. And for those who are deconstructing their faith, oftentimes what I find is they'll use church hurt as the surface level reason they're walking away, but oftentimes it's a much, much deeper than that.
Yeah.
It has to do with their own relationship with God that has been fractured or broken. And I think that's where church hurt actually can be so painful, because when a pastor messes up, when a church leader does something divisive or toxic, they then project that upon God, right? And that's why it hurts more than some other forms of hurt. So owning that, acknowledging that, and pointing people to Jesus.
That's really good. I'd say first and foremost, I'm so sorry if you have experienced church hurt. It's very real.
Yeah.
I would encourage you to start this conversation with Jesus and to say, unpack why you were so surprised, because I think that's the emotion that comes up so quickly. And I think if you read the Bible, you should not be surprised. I think we should be horrified. I think that's a good response. We should be horrified at what someone did in Jesus's name that was not a Jesus thing to do. But we shouldn't be surprised, because it's all over the Bible that Jesus's people do awful things, oftentimes using their power and authority to do those awful things. So I'd start the conversation with Jesus and just say, Jesus, would you strip away everything that I learned about you from this person, for good and for bad? And would you begin to take me on a journey of showing me who you are apart from this person? I would be so raw and vulnerable with God to say, I'm angry that you let this happen to me, that I trusted myself to these people, and that you let them do this or that, or allow this or allow that. So be very, very raw and vulnerable with God, and then ask him to heal you. A really hard part of this process, if you want me to be very scriptural and practical, is at some point you are going to be called upon to forgive the person that hurt you. Matthew 18, Jesus says, if you do not forgive, you will not be forgiven. And so part of this is facing up to Jesus. I do not have the power to forgive this person, but not because they deserve it, they don't. But because you have forgiven me, I'm going to daily ask you to help me forgive them, because you will not want to be close to the God that let this happen ever. Right? So you at some point have to forgive in order to be able to receive that healing that Jesus offers and provides. Once you do that, and And my last caveat is I would say if it happened in community, it's going to need to be healed in community.
Yeah.
Probably not the same community. So it's okay for you to find a different pastor and a different group of people, but go search a different community of believers. Don't give up on the big C capital church because of what some little C church did to you.
Little C
right?
church. I
Little
love
C
it.
church.
Yeah, and it's like from a philosophical standpoint, fully agree. It's like we were talking today about like the category mistake of you're evaluating truth based on the actions of the followers of Jesus. So if Einstein, for instance, you found out that Einstein was a kleptomaniac and he stole a bunch of stuff, you don't go, well, now I'm going to reject all Einstein math because he's a jerk. In the same way, let's not throw out the truth of Christianity based on how the followers of Christianity have messed it up and fumbled. Yeah. It's a category mistake to go, Jesus isn't who he said he was because the church isn't good at following him. You know, and I think just acknowledging that, even just philosophically, and then personally just saying, okay, what's behind all of this and how can I find another community or whatever it is. So great conversation, guys, on doubt and deconstruction. Hopefully this has been helpful to you. Join us for our next episode.